Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are wrestling with a really fundamental question. It's something that I think touches every aspect of success. Why is it that some people, or some organizations, they just seem to effortlessly glide through challenges?
While others get stuck.
Exactly. Others who might be just as smart, just as educated, find themselves, well, perpetually struggling. They're always running into these obstacles they just never saw coming.
It's a really compelling observation, isn't it? And when you dig into the sources, the evidence is just overwhelming. It suggests the difference is it's rarely innate talent.
Right. It's not about being born a genius.
Not at all. Or having a fancy degree, or even just being lucky. It really, at the end of the day, comes down to one thing. Is your brain trained for strategic thinking, or is it just running on, reactive autopilot?
Autopilot, that's a great way to put it. We're talking about a fundamental difference in how your mind operates, really.
Totally.
I mean, think about it like the difference between playing checkers versus playing chess.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
With checkers, you're just reacting to the last move. Right. You're constantly in this catch-up mode. But chess, that's strategic intelligence. That's seeing 20 moves ahead.
It's anticipating outcomes, positioning yourself for an advantage before the threat even appears on the board.
Exactly. And I think most of us, if we're being honest, are making these incredibly complex decisions with an untrained mind. We're constantly falling for cognitive traps, following emotional impulses instead of, rigorous systematic analysis.
And those poor decisions, they just compound over time. It's what creates that draining feeling of always being one step behind.
So that's our mission today.
Right. Our mission with this deep dive is explicitly designed for you to basically shortcut the years of trial and error it would normally take to build this skill.
We're going to explore the hidden science behind it.
Yeah, because the research is so clear on this. Strategic thinking is not a gift you're born with. It's not a personality trait. It is, by definition, a completely trainable skill.
A skill. I love that.
It's built on specific principles, specific techniques that you can use to literally rewire your brain's default energy-saving patterns for more deliberate, systematic, and, most importantly, effective decision-making.
So we're essentially giving you the mental tools used by, the greatest chess grandmasters, the most successful entrepreneurs.
The people who seem to build generational wealth. We're installing their operating system into your own thinking.
So after this deep dive, you should be able to approach any complex situation, personal or professional, with a new kind of confidence, knowing you have the structure to break it down, analyze it, and find the best path forward, no matter how chaotic it seems.
Yeah. Okay, so let's break down this foundation. I want to figure out what strategic thinking actually looks like in practice.
Right.
Because when we talk about strategic intelligence, it's more than just being smart. It's this ability to move past the surface level stuff, the symptoms.
And see the deeper underlying forces at work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's the foresight that lets you anticipate where things are going so you can position yourself advantageously.
And according to all the source material, this whole structure, it rests on four absolutely critical pillars.
Yeah, 4 core pillars. And the first one is, I would argue, the most encompassing. It's the one that sort of holds everything else together.
Okay, what is it?
It's systems thinking.
Systems thinking.
At its core, it's the fundamental recognition that everything is connected, that no event, no problem ever happens in a vacuum.
Which is so counter to how we normally think, right? We love to find that one single, easy culprit to blame for everything.
We do. It's our default. When a non-strategic thinker looks at a problem, let's say sales are down or product launch failed, they isolate it. They hunt for that single, immediate cause.
But a strategic thinker sees something different.
They see an entire ecosystem.
Okay, so give us an example. That business with falling sales.
Yeah.
How does a systems thinker approach that differently?
Well, the reactive response, the autopilot thinking, is to say the product quality must be bad or our marketing copy isn't working. They isolate the event.
Blaming one department.
Exactly. A strategic systems thinker wouldn't even start there. They understand that the visible problem, the customer loss, is almost certainly just a symptom of deeper systemic issues.
So what does that systemic checkup look like? What are they looking at?
They're examining the entire interconnected system. They're looking at market conditions, competitor actions. Those are feeding into customer choices.
External factors.
Right. But then they look internally. What about R&D, the supply chain? What's team morale like? All of that is feeding into the product quality itself. And then you have the company's policies, its incentives. those are feeding into employee behavior.
So if your supplier is late, your engineers are burned out, and your marketing team is incentivized to overpromise.
Then losing customers is just the inevitable output of that complex, interconnected system. Blaming just one part of it is like, I don't know, trying to treat a fever with an ice pack instead of diagnosing the underlying infection.
So the lesson here is that the problem you see is almost never the real problem. It's just the signal that the underlying structure is flawed.
That's it. And if systems thinking helps us zoom out in terms of scope, the second pillar, temporal thinking, shifts our focus from space to time.
Temporal thinking.
This is the ability to hold multiple simultaneous time horizons in your mind at once. It's a kind of mental complexity that, frankly, most people just don't develop.
Well, we're all optimized for the present, right? What's happening right now? What's my immediate reward or pain?
That's our evolutionary bias, 100%. But the strategic edge comes from being able to evaluate how a decision today will impact outcomes not just this week, but in 6 months, in 2 years, maybe even in a decade.
And the research is pretty clear on this, isn't it?
Oh, it's crystal clear. The most important high-leverage consequences of any big decision almost never show up immediately. They're deferred. They're hidden in the future.
And the cost of ignoring that is just massive.
Yeah.
I mean, it leads to everything from accumulating credit card debt for that immediate gratification.
Or, in a professional context, burnout. You prioritize all these short-term, urgent tasks over the long-term important skill development that would actually advance your career.
The classic example of this has to be Warren Buffett.
It's the perfect illustration. While all his competitors and the analysts are totally fixated on quarterly returns, a 90-day time horizon, he's holding stocks for decades.
He's playing a completely different game.
A completely different game on a different timeline. And that perspective lets him just ignore all the noise and volatility that paralyzes short-term traders. That difference in temporal thinking is precisely what builds his massive compounding advantage over time.
It's a simple question to ask yourself, really. What decision would benefit the me of 10 years from now? You often get a radically different answer than if you ask, what decision feels best right now?
And that realization leads you right into the third pillar, probabilistic thinking.
Okay.
This one requires you to shift away from thinking in these binary certainties, that simplistic, will this work, yes or no question.
So instead of demanding a guarantee, which you never get anyway, the strategic mind asks a more nuanced question.
It asks, what is the probability this will work? And just as importantly, what is the full range of potential outcomes if it does?
It's about thinking in ranges, not in single points.
Exactly. And you don't need to be a statistician to do this. It's a mindset shift. Let's say you're launching a new product. The non-strategic mind is just aiming for that one box labeled success.
Right, the home run.
Yeah. The strategic probabilistic mind maps out at least 3 points. What's the minimum acceptable outcome? What's the most likely or expected outcome? And what's the spectacular best-case scenario outcome?
And by defining that low end of the range first, the minimum viable path, you're protecting yourself.
You're ensuring that even if things go badly, the decision isn't a catastrophe. You've defined and accepted the downside risk before you've even committed.
I love that.
Yeah.
At the high end, the spectacular outcome, that helps you figure out how to position yourself to capture the maximum value if things go incredibly well.
Which is exactly what someone like Jeff Bezos did with Amazon. He didn't know for certain that it would become what it is today. But he calculated a very high base probability that internet commerce, as a general trend, would grow significantly.
He bet on the trend, not the specific outcome.
Precisely. He positioned the company to capture value from that powerful trend, regardless of whether Amazon ended up selling books or, well, everything else. The trend's probability was high, and he essentially bought the optionality to participate in its success.
And that idea of positioning connects directly to the fourth and final pillar.
It does, leverage thinking. This is the constant, rigorous search for points of maximum leverage, those small inputs that create disproportionately large outputs.
This is like the difference between being efficient and being effective, but taken to the extreme.
Yes, most people focus on efficiency. How do I do this task faster? Strategic thinkers focus on effectiveness and leverage. Which single task, if I do it once, will eliminate the need for 10 other tasks down the line?
They're always looking for the bottleneck.
The bottleneck, the constraint. They focus their limited energy, their time and attention on identifying that one thing holding the entire system back. Because if they can remove that single constraint, the whole system accelerates without demanding more effort from every other part.
So instead of, say, pushing to execute an average decision 20% faster, A strategic thinker might spend weeks just thinking through one crucial high-stakes decision.
Because that massive upfront investment in analysis saves them months of wasted execution time, costly course corrections, or even outright failure later on. They accomplish more with less total effort because they found the point of maximum impact.
That's the definition of leverage.
It is. But here's the catch. Understanding these four pillars, systems, temporal, probabilistic, and leverage thinking just intellectually, that's only the first step.
Okay, what's the next?
To actually apply them, especially under pressure, you have to consciously override your brain's evolutionary default settings. Our brains evolved to be fast and energy-conserving. Strategic intelligence requires training the brain to be slow, deliberate, and flexible. And this relies on three core mental overrides.
The first one sounds like a superpower: metacognitive awareness.
It really is the foundation of strategic self-control. It's about developing an internal observer, a sort of inner narrator that objectively monitors your own thought processes.
You're watching yourself think.
Yes, most people are completely unconscious of their own thinking. They just have thoughts and then they react to them. Strategic thinkers learn to step outside their own mental stream and observe how they are thinking.
So they can catch themselves in the act of slipping into a mental trap.
Exactly. They catch themselves falling for a bias, or they realize they're reacting emotionally instead of analytically, or they recognize they're just running an old, outdated pattern. And then they can deliberately choose a more effective thinking strategy. It's moving from being a passenger in your own mind to being the pilot.
Okay, that's a huge one. What's the second override?
The second is crucial because, not every problem requires the same approach. It's cognitive flexibility.
Having a full mental toolkit.
A full toolkit and knowing which tool to use for which job. It's the ability to shift your thinking modes based on the situation. Sometimes you need to be purely analytical, breaking a problem down into its tiniest pieces. Other times you need to be synthetic, looking for how disparate ideas connect into a new, larger pattern.
So it's being able to consciously decide, okay, for this problem, I need to stop thinking like a sales manager focused on this quarter's numbers and start thinking like a long-term systems engineer focused on stability.
That is a perfect example. Flexibility is about selecting the right intellectual approach, game theory for a competitive negotiation, root cause analysis for a recurring problem, instead of just applying the same old cognitive hammer to every single nail you see.
And finally, the override that sounds like it requires the most discipline: intellectual humility.
This might be the most critical one for long-term strategic growth. Intellectual humility is the objective recognition that your initial impression, your gut feeling, your first solution. It's highly likely to be incomplete or just plain wrong.
But most people do the opposite. They double down.
They do. Most people suffer from overconfidence, and they spend all their time looking for evidence to confirm their first judgment. We'll talk about that bias later. The strategic thinker, however, assumes their first impression is probably flawed and actively, deliberately looks for evidence that contradicts their initial assessment.
But I have to push back on that a little. If I'm constantly questioning my assumptions, doesn't that just lead to analysis paralysis? How do you balance that humility with the conviction you need to actually make a decision and act on it?
That is a fantastic question, and it's a fundamental strategic tension. Humility doesn't mean being indecisive. It means being incredibly rigorous before the decision and then being committed after the decision, but, and this is key, always ready to course correct if new information demands it.
Okay.
Humility demands that you dedicate that time up front to seek out the disconfirming evidence. That way, your eventual conviction is built on a robust foundation, not just on your ego. Changing your mind when you get better data isn't weakness. It's the ultimate sign of intellectual strength and strategic agility.
So you put it all together, the four pillars: systems, temporal, probabilistic, and leverage thinking. And then you layer on these three overrides: metacognition, flexibility, and humility.
Yeah.
That's the foundation for strategic intelligence you can apply anywhere.
Yeah.
So we built the foundation. Now we have to confront the great saboteur of all strategic thought, the autopilot.
The enemy within.
Exactly. I mean, the research is so clear on this. The brain is inherently lazy because it's a massive energy hog. It uses something like 20% of your body's entire energy budget.
It's an incredible number. And to conserve that precious fuel, it relies heavily on what are called heuristics. These are those automatic, energy-saving mental shortcuts.
And that autopilot is great for routine stuff, right? Like walking or driving a route you take every day. It frees up your conscious mind.
It's essential for that. But when you face a complex new challenge, that same energy-saving mechanism starts to make systematic, predictable errors because it's prioritizing speed and familiarity over rigorous, careful analysis.
And that's where these destructive patterns come from.
Yes. And we can really break them down into three major manifestations. The first is pattern matching without context.
Okay, what does that mean?
Your brain sees a new situation, a new challenge at work, a new market dynamic, and it immediately searches its memory for a previously successful solution you can just apply again.
So if you solved problem A with method X 5 years ago,
Your brain's default is to just apply method X to what looks like a similar problem, problem B, today.
then what's the danger there?
The danger is when the underlying dynamics, the context, have fundamentally changed. The sources are full of examples of this from business history. Think about a company like Blockbuster.
The classic.
They had a supremely successful pattern for renting physical media. When Netflix showed up, the Blockbuster leadership just applied their old pattern: maximize store count, optimize late fees, without recognizing that the entire context had shifted from physical delivery to digital distribution.
They were trying to run old software on a brand new operating system.
It was guaranteed to fail. The second manifestation is a total strategic catastrophe, and it usually happens when the stakes are highest. It's emotional hijacking.
This is when your emotions take over.
They don't just take over, they hijack the entire system. When stress or uncertainty or a real threat hits, the primitive, survival-focused parts of your brain, the limbic system, they seize control from the strategic planning center, the prefrontal cortex.
So your brain literally changes how it works.
It does. Your nervous system gets flooded with stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, and neurologically, this literally impairs your working memory, and it drastically reduces your cognitive flexibility. Your strategic focus just narrows down to the immediate threat, making any kind of comprehensive analysis totally impossible.
So at the exact moment we need strategic clarity the most, when we're under immense pressure, our own nervous system is actively sabotaging our ability to think clearly.
It's the ultimate evolutionary irony. It explains why people consistently make their absolute worst decisions in a moment of panic or anger or fear.
And the third destructive pattern.
The third is cognitive conservatism. This is the brain's tendency to view anything new, a new strategy, a new investment, as inherently risky and energetically expensive.
Because it requires real, conscious effort.
Exactly. Familiar approaches, even if you know they're suboptimal, they feel safe and easy because they've worked before to some degree.
This sounds like the engine that powers the status quo.
It is the powerful internal bias toward the familiar. It keeps people stuck in jobs they hate, it causes entire organizations to resist critical innovation, and it ensures that we stick with strategies long after objectively better alternatives are staring us in the face. Breaking that pattern takes huge effort because your brain is actively fighting to stay on that familiar, easier, lower energy path.
Okay, so this autopilot is powerful. How do we build that mental override system? How do we break free?
We need to consciously develop what's called cognitive control. This is the ability to direct your attention, manage your emotional state, and override those automatic responses.
And the first practical step,
Is to install trigger recognition systems.
like mental alarm bells, what sets them off?
They're signals that tell you, hey, you're running on autopilot right now. You need to switch to deliberate thinking. Your triggers should include things like feeling acutely stuck on a problem, experiencing a really strong emotional reaction, good or bad, or catching yourself applying a familiar solution without any fresh analysis.
And when one of those alarms goes off, what do?
You immediately deploy a cognitive debiasing technique.
Okay, let's get into those. The first one is so powerful, but also requires some humility. It's the outside view method.
Yes. We're all naturally a bit narcissistic about our problems. We think they're special and unique. The outside view forces you to step away from the unique, compelling details of your situation and instead ask a simple, powerful question. What typically happens in situations like this?
So you're looking for the base rate, the statistics.
You're forcing yourself to consult base rates and statistical patterns. For example, if you're predicting the success of your brilliant new business idea, the inside view focuses on your passion, your great team, your unique design. The outside view asks, what is the historical failure rate for all startups in this sector over the last 5 years?
And if that base rate is, say, 90% failure,
Then you must start your planning by acknowledging those brutal odds, no matter how enthusiastic you are. It grounds your prediction in reality and protects you from your own overconfidence.
Okay, what's next? A preventative technique called prospective hindsight, or the premortem.
This one is fantastic. Standard planning assumes success, and then you plan the steps to get there. The premortem flips that completely on its head.
How does it work?
You start by asking a radical question. It is 1 year from now and this plan has failed spectacularly. Why did it fail? You imagine the catastrophe has already happened, and then you work backward from that failure to identify all the potential causes and blind spots that you ignored before.
That's fascinating. Why is that so effective?
Because it changes the cognitive game. In a normal planning meeting, raising potential problems can be seen as negative or being a downer. In a premortem, the job of identifying causes of failure is mandated and celebrated. It bypasses what's called the planning fallacy, that biased assumption that everything will go smoothly, and forces the team to uncover risks that normal planning almost always misses.
And for stress testing a conclusion you feel really strongly about, there is Opus Project.
This is non-negotiable. If you reach a conclusion with high confidence, you must deliberately force yourself to generate arguments for the exact opposite position. Strategic thinkers understand that strong conclusions carry high risk. You have to actively try to demolish your own idea.
And if it survives that demolition attempt?
Then, and only then, can you increase your confidence level.
Okay, let's shift to the systematic errors that affect everyone, the cognitive biases. The source material says the brain lies to you constantly in these predictable ways, often when you think you're being the most rational.
And they're not moral failings. They're just functional shortcuts that manage complexity but introduce these predictable errors. Understanding them is mandatory.
So let's start with the one you call the most destructive, confirmation bias.
It's so destructive because it creates the illusion of validation. The moment you form an initial opinion, your brain automatically starts filtering all new information to support that opinion, while actively ignoring or quickly dismissing anything that contradicts it.
So if I believe a certain stock is a great investment,
You'll only click on and remember the articles that support its growth potential. You'll explain away any negative news. And the result is that two equally intelligent people can look at the exact same set of data and come to two completely opposite conclusions, both believing they are 100% supported by the evidence.
because they're only seeing the filtered subset of evidence that confirms what they already wanted to believe. It creates these self-reinforcing echo chambers inside your own head.
Exactly. And it makes updating your beliefs almost impossible. The more you research, the more confident you become, not realizing you're just digging deeper into your own filter bubble.
Okay, next up, the availability heuristic. This one causes huge distortions in how we assess risk.
It does. This is where you judge the probability of an event based on how easily and vividly you can recall examples of it.
So things that are dramatic or get a lot of media coverage.
Right. A rare but tragic industrial accident or a viral news story. They're highly memorable, so we massively overestimate how likely they are to happen. Meanwhile, mundane but statistically common dangers like heart disease or falling down the stairs, we underestimate them because they don't create these vivid, memorable impressions.
This is why people are more afraid of flying than driving, even though driving is statistically exponentially riskier. The memory of a plane crash is just immediate and terrifyingly accessible.
Precisely. Your assessment of real risk becomes a function of memory accessibility, not actual statistical frequency. And that leads you to waste strategic resources worrying about low probability, high drama events.
And the third major bias here is anchoring bias.
The principle here is that the very first piece of information you encounter disproportionately influences all your subsequent judgments and estimates. That first number acts as an anchor, and our adjustments away from that anchor are almost always insufficient.
You see this all the time in negotiations. The person who makes the first offer, even if it's a ridiculous number, has a massive strategic advantage.
A huge advantage. That first number anchors the entire conversation. It explains why first impressions, initial price tags, even an arbitrary number someone asks you to write down can skew your estimation of value or cost. Your brain latches onto that initial information as a reference point and then just doesn't adjust far enough away from it.
Okay, let's talk about how these biases mess up strategic planning. The classic one is the planning fallacy.
Oh, this is the systematic universal tendency to underestimate how long projects will take and how much they'll cost.
And it happens even when people have tons of experience with similar projects that also took longer than expected.
It's incredible, isn't it? When we plan our own projects, we focus on our specific steps. We imagine everything going smoothly, and we fail to adequately consider the reference class of all the similar projects and the unexpected complications that always come up.
And that's usually coupled with overconfidence bias.
They're a dangerous pair. Overconfidence causes us to overestimate the accuracy of our own judgments. This is so risky in strategic decision-making because if you're overly confident in your predictions, you won't invest the necessary time in contingency planning or risk management.
Why bother planning for scenarios you think have only a 5% chance of happening?
Exactly. The bias convinces you that your judgment is much more reliable than it actually is.
And finally, there's the really insidious one, the bias blind spot.
This is the social side of the problem. It's our tendency to recognize all these cognitive biases in everyone else, in our competitors, in the media, in our colleagues, while remaining completely blind to the exact same biases in our own thinking.
So just knowing about biases isn't enough to protect you from them.
Not even close. So the source material is very clear. Even people with extensive training in cognitive science continue to fall victim to them. Knowledge alone is not a sufficient defense. You need systematic processes.
Okay, so if awareness isn't the solution, what are these high-leverage defense systems we need to install?
We have to formalize adversarial thinking. The first process is called red team analysis.
Red team.
Since it's basically impossible to see your own flaws, you deliberately assign someone or a whole team to adopt the role of the devil's advocate. Their only job is to find flaws, to argue against the preferred position, and to poke holes in the central reasoning using external data. It formalizes that consider the opposite technique.
And how do we ground our optimistic predictions in reality? That brings us back to what you mentioned earlier.
Base rate and reference class analysis. This is the systematic defense against the planning fallacy and overconfidence. Instead of relying on your optimistic, unique scenario, you ground your predictions in empirical data from similar situations.
You asked, how long do projects like this typically take, regardless of our own internal optimism?
Yes. You force yourself to use the statistical distribution of outcomes in similar situations, the reference class, to calibrate your expectations. It's a cold, objective anchor that protects you from your own internal biases.
And at the end of the day, it all comes back full circle to intellectual humility.
It really is the ultimate defense system. The goal is to maintain a level of confidence that is calibrated precisely to the actual reliability of your thinking. You should be highly confident in areas where you have deep, verifiable expertise. But you must maintain high uncertainty and rigorously apply all these debiasing techniques in complex, novel, or emotionally charged situations where your biases are most likely to take over.
That rigorous self-awareness, that's the highest strategic defense. Okay, so the next stage in building up this strategic intelligence is really about arming ourselves with the right tools. And these tools are called mental models.
Yes, the investor Charlie Munger famously described this as building a latticework of models.
So what exactly is a mental model?
A mental model is basically a simplified representation of how something works in one domain, say physics or economics, but its incredible power comes from its transferability. You can take an insight from one field and apply it to a completely different one.
That transferability, that's the high leverage point of this whole section.
Absolutely. If you understand, for example, the fundamental model of supply and demand in economics, you start to see it everywhere.
Like in your own time management.
Exactly. The supply of your time versus the demand of your tasks. Or even in relationships, the supply of your emotional energy versus the demand for your attention. The strategic thinker doesn't just use one model, they use multiple complementary models to look at a problem from different angles, which reveals all these hidden mechanisms.
Okay, so let's run through some of the core high leverage models everyone should have in their toolkit. The first set seems to be about understanding change itself. Let's talk about feedback loops.
Right. A feedback loop happens when the output of a system cycles back around and becomes an input, creating this continuous pattern. And we have to differentiate between the two major types.
Okay.
First, you have positive loops. These amplify change. Think of success leading to more resources, which leads to better performance, which leads to even more success.
It's that runaway effect.
Yeah.
Success breeds more success, but on the flip side, self-doubt can also breed more self-doubt. It's exponential growth or decline.
Precisely. They drive instability. On the other hand, you have negative loops, which create stability and maintain a set point. The classic example is a thermostat. If the room gets too hot, which is the output,
Your thermostat triggers the AC, the input, which cools the room back down.
it counteracts the change. Negative loops are essential for stability, but they can also create stubborn resistance when you actually need to change. Strategic thinkers figure out which type of loop is dominant in their environment. Is this system unstable and prone to runaway change? Or is it a resilient system designed to stabilize and maintain the status quo? Knowing that helps you predict its behavior.
Okay, for decision-making under uncertainty, which is pretty much every important decision, we need the optionality model.
Optionality is about structuring your life, your career, your business so that you have the right, but not the obligation, to take advantage of future opportunities.
Options are valuable because they cap your downside risk.
Exactly. The cost of the option is defined, but it preserves this unlimited upside potential.
I think about this a lot in terms of career skills. If you specialize too early in one narrow skill, you gain competence, but you lose optionality if that skill suddenly becomes obsolete.
That's a perfect application. Diversifying your skills keeps your career options open and minimizes that risk. In business, financial reserves create optionality to invest during a recession when all your competitors are paralyzed. Maintaining a flexible schedule creates optionality to seize a spontaneous opportunity. Optionality is an active, strategic choice to preserve your future freedom.
Now, for what might be the most important models for understanding human systems? Incentives.
To understand and predict how people will behave, in your company, in politics, in your own family, you have to look at what is actually rewarded and punished in the environment. Forget the stated motivations or the company values on the wall.
Strategic thinkers are masters of mapping these incentive structures.
They have to be. And the biggest pitfall here is the perverse outcome. Incentives often lead to unintended destructive outcomes because people are rational actors. They will optimize for the metrics they're being measured on.
You're talking about the Cobra effect.
The classic example, the British government in India offered a bounty for dead cobras to reduce the cobra population. What did people do?
They started breeding cobras to collect the reward.
Which increased the population. A classic perverse outcome. And when the government scrapped the incentive, the breeders just released the now worthless snakes, leading to a permanent increase in the wild population. Strategic insight demands you look past the stated goals to what behavior the rewards are actually driving.
And another powerful behavioral model is social proof.
This is the idea that people use the behavior of others as a guide, especially when they're uncertain or in a new situation. It's a mental shortcut that assumes if everyone else is doing this, they must know something I don't.
So it's not just peer pressure.
It's a fundamental decision-making heuristic, and strategic influence relies on it. If you want to change behavior in a group, creating visible examples of the desired behavior is often far more effective than just issuing instructions or rules. You use the system's own social dynamics to influence the individuals within it.
These models are all incredibly powerful for refining existing systems. But to get to those true paradigm-shifting breakthroughs, we have to talk about the revolutionary strategy that just tears down the walls of conventional thinking. First principles thinking.
Yes, or FPT. This is the necessary antidote to our brain's default, which is lazy analogical thinking. We established that our brains love to reason by analogy. What does this situation remind me of?
It's fast, but it traps you.
It tracks your solutions within the confines of conventional wisdom and historical precedent. FPT, however, requires you to break down a complex problem into its absolute fundamental components and then reason up from those basic verified truths.
It's the single most powerful tool for revealing those hidden assumptions and artificial constraints that everyone else just takes for granted.
The classic, powerful example is Elon Musk looking at rocketry. The conventional wisdom for decades was rockets are inherently expensive, period. Reasoning by analogy means you just try to make that existing expensive design maybe 5 or 10% cheaper.
But Musk used first principles thinking.
He asked a different question. He asked, what are the fundamental basic material components of a rocket? Aluminum alloys, oxygen fuel. What do these commodities actually cost on the open market?
And what was the discovery?
He found that the raw materials cost only about 2% of the conventional price of a rocket.
Wow.
This revealed that the staggering expense wasn't due to fundamental laws of physics or the scarcity of elements. It was due to artificial constraints, specifically complex supply chains, bloated manufacturing processes, and the core design choice that rockets had to be expendable.
By questioning that one core artificial constraint,
he could justify the massive investment in reusable rockets, completely transforming the cost structure of the entire industry.
That is profound. The only way to get to that answer is to ignore the existing solution and rebuild from the ground up. So how can we, the learners, apply this systematically? What are the steps?
Okay, Step one is to identify and question assumptions. For every constraint, every tradition, every stated requirement, you must constantly ask why until you can't ask it anymore. You are hunting for constraints that are just arbitrary human conventions. We've always done it this way, not immutable laws of nature. You have to ask, what if this weren't true?
Okay, so you identify the assumptions. Step 2.
Step two is break down into fundamental components. This means getting past all the surface features and identifying the basic elements and principles governing the situation. You strip the problem of all its jargon and its complexity, and you often discover that problems that look very different on the surface, like optimizing a factory production line versus optimizing your morning routine, are actually just variations of the same underlying challenge of resource allocation and flow.
And then the final step is to rebuild.
Step three, rebuild solutions from the ground up. You construct new possibilities using only the fundamental building blocks you've identified. And since you've discarded all the conventional wisdom and artificial constraints, you are now free to innovate radically, constrained only by fundamental physical, economic, and human laws.
But these problems can feel overwhelmingly complex. We need a way to manage that. We need to master problem decomposition.
Yes. Breaking the challenge into manageable pieces is essential. We can start with constraint-based decomposition. This is the practical application of leverage thinking. Using the theory of constraints, you focus all your analytical energy on identifying the single active constraint that is currently limiting your progress the most severely.
Can you give us a simple example?
Sure, think about a home renovation project. It's a complex system. You might feel you should be working faster on installing the kitchen cabinets. That's a low leverage activity. But if the real constraint, the real bottleneck, is the local government's permitting process,
Then all the speed in the world on the cabinets is wasted effort.
totally wasted. The bottleneck is the permit. Solve that one problem and the entire project accelerates. Strategic thinkers are ruthless about focusing on the current constraint.
And then we need to make sure we're actually solving the real problem, not just a symptom. That requires root cause decomposition.
This is where you use techniques like the 5 whys, just asking why repeatedly, or constructing what's called a fishbone diagram. The goal is to drill down past the surface symptoms to the fundamental drivers.
So if a customer cancels their subscription,
Adding why
okay,
6 times might take you from the price was too high, which is just a symptom, to the pricing structure penalizes small clients, which is a policy issue, all the way down to the leadership team requires an unrealistically high quarterly revenue growth rate, which is the fundamental incentive driver. You have to address the driver, not the symptom.
And finally, because these challenges are rarely just technical, we need stakeholder decomposition.
Yes, this involves rigorously mapping out all the people and groups who are influenced by the problem. You have to understand their legitimate needs, their incentives, and the potential conflicts between them. So many technically elegant solutions fail, not because they're unsound, but because they completely ignored the human and political dynamics that a careful stakeholder analysis would have revealed.
A perfect system that nobody wants to use is strategically worthless.
Exactly. Okay, we have to now address the environment where all the strategic thinking often just completely collapses when we're under stress and pressure.
Right. As we said before, the stress hormones shift your brain into that reactive, primitive mode.
They do. So the ability to actually execute strategic thought when it matters most requires preparation and the disciplined use of specific decision frameworks.
And the first step is to actually inoculate ourselves against the stress. The sources call this stress inoculation.
Yeah. This means deliberately practicing strategic thinking in increasingly high pressure but controlled situations. Your brain learns to maintain its cognitive function despite the physiological fight or flight activation.
So like simulations.
Exactly. Athletes and emergency responders do this constantly through simulation, but you can apply it in your own life by practicing a big presentation under a tight time constraint, or even with slightly uncomfortable environmental factors like loud music. The goal is to train your neural pathways to access those analytical thought centers even when your nervous system is screaming at you.
But when the pressure hits for real and we don't have that cognitive bandwidth, we need predetermined, systematic processes to fall back on. Decision protocols.
Absolutely. Having a systematic approach reduces the cognitive load of just deciding how to think. One of the best protocols, which comes from the military but is transferable to anything, is the ODA loop.
ODA. Observe, orient, decide, act.
Right. It provides structure under fire. Observe is just gathering raw data, what's happening right now.
And orient is the key step, right? That's the strategic part.
That's the strategic center of the whole loop. Orient is where you synthesize that raw data in context. You apply your mental models, you factor in your known biases, you understand the stakes. It's the strategic intelligence phase. And only once that orientation is complete do you act, decide on a minimal viable course of action, and then act always ready to cycle immediately back to observation, because the moment you act, the environment changes.
It's a disciplined, rapid cycle that prevents you from just reacting emotionally.
That's the whole point. And we also have to counter that natural tendency under pressure to only focus on what's right in front of us. The present screams so much louder than the future.
This is where we reintroduce that temporal thinking we talked about.
We do, with a simple but incredibly powerful tool, the 1-0-10-10 rule. For any significant urgent decision, you quickly force yourself to consider how you will feel about that decision in 10 minutes, 10 months, and 10 years.
It sounds almost too simple. How does it work strategically?
It's a forced perspective shift. A decision that might feel great in 10 minutes because it brings immediate emotional relief might feel absolutely terrible in 10 months when the long-term fallout arrives. This simple check forces you to acknowledge the long-term impact of your immediate emotional choices. It stops you from choosing a quick fix that creates a massive, deferred problem.
And finally, under a truly fixed deadline, the strategy has to shift. You need to make good enough decisions.
When a deadline is truly immutable, perfectionism is not a virtue, it is the enemy. It just leads to analysis paralysis, which is often a worse outcome than making any conscious suboptimal choice. You have to strategically identify the minimum viable criteria for an acceptable decision, the absolute must-haves, and then you commit to the very first option that meets those standards. You avoid that exhaustive, time-consuming search for a theoretical perfect solution that doesn't actually exist in the real world.
But strategic thinking isn't just about cold, hard logic. We have to bring our feelings into it. Let's talk about integrated emotional intelligence.
This is so important. Emotions are not distractions to be suppressed. They are crucial information processing systems. They signal your values, potential threats, and hidden opportunities.
So when we feel a strong emotion about a decision, the strategic move is not to ignore it.
No, it's to pause and actively decode the signal. Fear, for example, is not just discomfort. It's a warning system. It's signaling potential risks that your purely analytical mind might have overlooked. Excitement is signaling an opportunity that aligns powerfully with your core motivations. And frustration often signals a major conflict between your current approach and your underlying values.
So the goal isn't to eliminate emotions, but to manage them so they inform our thinking without completely hijacking it.
Which is where emotional regulation as strategy comes in, specifically a technique called cognitive reappraisal.
Okay, what's that?
It's a trained mental move. Instead of viewing an obstacle or some harsh criticism as a personal threat, which triggers that destructive fight-or-flight response, you consciously and actively reframe it. You reframe it as a puzzle to be solved, or as data for improvement, or an opportunity for growth.
And that reframing actually changes your brain's response.
It does. It activates the curiosity and exploration systems in your brain, which enhances your cognitive performance rather than impairing it.
Okay, let's shift back to systems thinking, but now focusing on how we actually intervene to change those systems for the better. The core insight here is that behavior is structure.
Yes. If you see a persistent, predictable pattern of behavior in any system, an organization that constantly misses deadlines or a relationship that keeps having the same fight, the root cause is in the system's design, its policies, or its incentives. It's not in the moral failing of the individual actors.
So trying to change the individuals without changing the system is a losing battle.
It leads only to temporary, unsustainable relief. So to create maximum durable impact, we have to focus our interventions on the highest leverage points. And to do that, we need to understand the hierarchy defined by the brilliant systems theorist Donella Meadows.
The Donella Meadows hierarchy. This shows us where our efforts will generate the biggest results.
Precisely. At the very low leverage end of the hierarchy, you can change numbers. You can tweak budgets, adjust targets, change minor metrics. This influences behavior a little bit, but it doesn't change the underlying structure. It's easily reversed.
Okay, moving up from there.
Higher, at medium leverage, you can change elements. You can swap out personnel or upgrade technology. This is more impactful than just changing numbers, but very often the new element just adapts to the old structure.
So where's the real leverage?
At high leverage, you start changing the connections within the system. Things like information flows or who has decision-making authority. For example, decentralizing decision-making from one executive down to 3 project leads can transform outcomes simply by altering the flow of information and increasing speed.
And the most profound levels of change, the ones that truly restructure the entire system.
Very high leverage is changing the rules. The actual policies, procedures, regulations, or the core incentive structures. If you want employees to collaborate, you have to change the rules so that their compensation is based on shared team success, not just individual success. But the highest leverage point of all, the ultimate strategic intervention, is changing the paradigms or mindsets from which the entire system arises.
Changing the collective belief about what is true or what is possible.
That's it. When a collective mindset shifts, when a company shifts from a paradigm of scarcity, we must protect what we have, to a paradigm of abundance, we must innovate rapidly to create new resources. Entire systems just restructure themselves around that new organizing principle, and those changes are durable because they're anchored in a shared, changed belief system.
And finally, we need principles for influencing people within these systems.
Yes, and we can use strategic influence guided by psychology. We've talked about reciprocity, but strategically, it's about small, thoughtful, non-generic gestures that signal you understand someone's specific needs. That creates far more psychological obligation and goodwill than some big, expensive, generic gift.
And how we frame change initiatives is also critical.
We must use loss framing. People are profoundly loss averse. Studies show we are twice as motivated to avoid losing something we already have than we are to gain something new of equal value. Therefore, strategic change initiatives should always emphasize what people risk losing by not changing: market share, relevance, job security, rather than solely focusing on the future gains of the new path. It aligns the change with our powerful underlying psychology. We're now in the final stretch, and it's about the long game. The world is changing faster than ever, driven by technology and economic acceleration. And in this kind of environment, rigid intelligence being attached to a set of ideas that worked yesterday is actually a strategic liability.
So the ultimate goal isn't just to be intelligent, but to have adaptable intelligence.
Exactly. It's the ability to continuously update your thinking patterns and, crucially, to willingly abandon ineffective approaches when the evidence tells you to.
And this means overcoming huge internal resistance, doesn't it? Like sunk cost bias, sticking with a failing project just because you've already invested so much in it.
That and status quo bias, viewing any change as inherently riskier than maintaining the familiar, even when the familiar is clearly failing. Both are driven by ego and our brain's desire to conserve energy.
So to build that adaptability, we have to focus on active belief updating.
This is the practical application of intellectual humility fighting back against confirmation bias. It means you have to regularly and systematically examine your core assumptions.
How do you do that in practice?
You have to actively seek out intelligent people who fundamentally disagree with you. And you don't just debate them to win, you listen to understand their first principles and their evidence. The goal is to ensure your beliefs can withstand informed scrutiny. You have to learn to hold your current beliefs lightly, viewing them as simply the best current estimate.
We also need to diversify our cognitive toolkit. Mental model diversification.
It's just like financial diversification protecting you from investment risk. Cognitive diversification protects you from being blindsided by changes that your primary mental model didn't see coming. You should practice switching frameworks.
How would an economist analyze this situation?
Exactly. Versus, how would a systems biologist view this organizational chart? Or how would a historian view this market trend? This multi-perspective analysis reveals insights that single framework thinking misses entirely, making your judgment much more robust.
And this feeds directly into how we should approach long-term planning. Strategic planning isn't about predicting the future perfectly.
No, it's about developing robust approaches that work across multiple possible futures. And the essential tool for that is scenario planning.
How does that work?
You identify the 2 or 3 key uncertainties that could significantly impact your situation. Things you can't control, like a sudden technological shift. Then you develop 3 to 5 distinct, plausible future scenarios based on how those uncertainties might resolve. You might have a best-case scenario, a slow collapse scenario, and a disruptive revolution scenario.
And the planning part is key.
For each of those scenarios, you identify the necessary strategies you would employ, and this is crucial, the early warning signals. What would you see that would tell you this particular future is starting to materialize? This preparation doesn't predict the future, but it ensures that you recognize change early, and you know exactly how to pivot when one scenario begins to unfold. You go from being surprised by the future to being prepared for several versions of it.
And throughout all this, we have to be ruthless in allocating our finite resources. Strategic resource allocation.
You have to use the 80-20 principle, the Pareto principle, to focus your absolute best resources, your time, your attention, your best people on the highest leverage opportunities. And strategic thinkers understand that this often means saying a committed no to good opportunities so that you can commit fully to the truly great ones. Spreading your effort too widely guarantees mediocrity.
Okay, this is where the rubber meets the road. All this knowledge, without implementation, is just, as the source says, intellectual entertainment. How do we make sure these principles become habitual?
It has to start with deliberate practice. You must actively and consistently practice these principles in increasingly challenging and higher stakes situations until they become second nature. You can't just read about first principles thinking. You have to apply it to dissect a complex personal problem this week.
And to track that application, we need the decision journal.
This is a non-negotiable tool for anyone serious about accelerating their strategic development. You have to record all of your important decisions. You write down the precise reasoning you used, the strategic principles you applied, your confidence level at the time of the decision, and then later, the actual outcome.
And reviewing that journal shows you the patterns in your own thinking.
It's like game film for your mind. You systematically identify the specific biases you fall for most often, the models that work best for you, and the situations where your confidence is consistently miscalibrated.
And the final marker of success is changing how we even measure progress. We need to focus on the quality of the thinking process, not just the outcome.
This is paramount. Good strategic thinking improves your probability of achieving good outcomes, but it can never guarantee them because the world is inherently random. If a sound decision based on probabilistic thinking still leads to a poor outcome because of bad luck, you should still celebrate the quality of the process. You track whether you are consistently applying sound principles. If your process is good, success is highly probable over the long run, even if individual results vary.
And ultimately, the path to mastery is achieved when this whole way of thinking becomes your new natural default, replacing that old reactive autopilot.
Mastery is evidenced by a few final characteristics. You consistently seek out contradictory information. You maintain a level of confidence that is precisely calibrated to the actual uncertainty of the situation. You view every single setback not as a failure, but as valuable feedback for updating your models. And most importantly, you take ultimate responsibility for the quality of your thinking process above all else. That fundamental shifting perspective is the ultimate non-replicable strategic advantage.
Wow. We have covered so much ground today, really digging deep into the entire structure of strategic thought. We've unpacked those four essential pillar systems: temporal, probabilistic, and leverage thinking. We spent serious time installing the defense systems you need to counter your brain's destructive autopilot and all those cognitive biases.
And we armed you with high-leverage tools, from first principles thinking, which can just dissolve conventional constraints, all the way up to Donella Meadows' systems hierarchy, which shows you exactly where to focus your effort for maximum durable transformation.
And this entire journey, it's really about gaining what you could call conceptual independence.
That's a great way to put it. When you reason from first principles, when you identify and question those hidden assumptions, you free yourself from other people's expectations and assumptions about what is truly possible or necessary. And that conceptual independence is arguably the single most valuable capability you can develop. It provides clarity and unique opportunity in a world where conventional thinking is rapidly becoming obsolete.
So we'll leave you with this final provocative thought to take into your day. We learned that when you reason from first principles, you question the assumptions that everyone else just takes for granted. So think about your career, your relationships, or your biggest life goals right now. What conventional assumption about that domain are you still inheriting? An assumption about its cost, its speed, its necessity, or its possibility, simply because you haven't yet dared to break it down to its absolute fundamental components. Start there, go find that one inherited constraint, and see what changes when you dare to remove it.